In this video, I'm going to walk you through a simple six-figure resume format and show you step by step how to fill out each section. My name's Sam Struan, my background's in recruitment, and I now help individuals with personalized resume reviews and rewrites. Before we jump into the video, you can also go to my website, samstruan.com, and if you click free resume template, you'll get access to this template which you can use to follow along with this video. It also comes with example professions and metrics that might be able to help you fill out your own resume. So, jumping straight in terms of the format, what we've got here is a simple single column format, and this is generally the most widely accepted resume format. You'll notice there are no pictures, images, graphs, and charts. Those things are typically not the standard when it comes to resumes, at least in the Western markets. Top section here is the simple contact section, and I like to keep this clean and simple. What you want to have is your city and your country, or your city and your state, and then your email, phone number, just your mobile or cell number, or whichever number that you have that is your primary phone number. I'm assuming it's a cell phone number, but you don't need to put two different phone numbers on. I would also recommend that you customize your LinkedIn URL and include your URL, or you can just put the word LinkedIn and hyperlink it. Now, there's a couple of options for individuals who come from different backgrounds, such as design. You might then also link your portfolio if you come from the creative industry, or GitHub for technical software engineering roles. And then if you have another website, for example, for publications for academic roles, then you might also link that as well. But that's what I would recommend including in terms of the 4 bits of contact information and optional 5th one depending on your industry. And like I said, you can visit samstruan.com for the resume template if you haven't already got it. Now, this top section here, I like to call it the summary section. And some people will say there's no need to have a summary, but my thing is, as long as the information and the content is good, then a summary can be relevant. And my approach to this section here is I like to sum up my background very quickly in the first bullet point. And I'm going to show you an example of how I do this in my own resume. So this is my exact resume. As you can see, what I use for myself is also what I give out to everyone else for free. Now, what I like to do in the first bullet point is I like to give a quick snapshot of my background, and I do it using 3 things. I do it using the years of experience that I have, the roles or responsibilities that I've held, and then the types of organizations, but always quantified by headcount and revenue. This gives the reader a factual overview of your background, but also brings in objective content. So I can say to you, I have 10 years in agency and in-house recruiting, leading internal talent teams across North America at startups and global tech firms with 60 to 2,000 employees and up to 300 million in annual revenue. This is more effective than a kind of generic resume summary, which you often see. And often what I'll see is a resume summary that looks like this. You know, results-driven recruitment leader with a career-long record of talent ops and strategic relationship development. I'm adept at managing complex projects from design to implementation, and I have an ability to set a long-term vision. This is the kind of content that I call garbage content because it's all highly subjective, but doesn't really tell the reader anything about my background. Whereas my bullet point here, you can assess roughly my seniority level, and also you've got an indication of the roles and then the structures that I've operated in. So whether someone is a junior recruiter screening resumes as part of their first job or a CEO, this is easily understood and also objective. So this is why I recommend that you start off with kind of quantifying your experience. Now, one of the things that I get asked often is if someone has way more experience, like 20, 30 years experience, do they include that? And my kind of general advice is you can also adapt for particular experiences. For example, I actually have 15 plus years of work experience, but my first few years of experience were in customer service, retail, things that are not necessarily relevant or specific to the roles that I would target today. So instead, out of a total of 15 plus years of work experience, I only highlight the 10 that is the most relevant to the role. For example, someone might have 30 years of experience, but maybe they've only got 15 years in actual tech leadership and cybersecurity. So in that case, if you have more years of experience, you can also just specify the years of experience that you have that is the most relevant to the role. For junior individuals, what I would recommend is you can still do this if you've maybe held just a role that's maybe not relevant to your target organization. For example, let's say someone was in customer service and retail during their years studying, then what they might be able to say is 2 years experience in customer service and retail for a global technology company with 10,000 employees and 500 million annual revenue. Okay, so you could do something like that, or maybe it was a food organization. But what I'm saying is you can still quantify your work experience, and this is how top performers speak. You know, they talk about headcount, they talk about revenue. And if you worked 4 years part-time, then I would say that you can just say 2 years full-time, right? So you can kind of do that equation. And then if you have a degree or whatever your diploma is or certification, just include that in the second bullet point, just to quickly sum up your background to show that you have some working experience, but also perhaps your education is more relevant to your target role. So that's what I'd recommend in the summary section. Now, my approach to this summary section is this is the only section that I recommend tweaking in the resume. There's lots of advice out there that says create a new resume for every role that you apply to, or tweak the entire resume. I don't believe in that approach. My approach involves just tweaking the summary section if necessary, depending on the target role. So let me give you an example. In my own resume, I've got my intro bullet. This is an accurate and factual representation of my background, so this does not change. These bullet points here, I typically tailor towards the role. If I read a job description that's asking for something, and if I have that experience, then I'm going to highlight that in the summary section, front and center. It's prime real estate. It's the first thing that people see, and we might want to use this section to capture the reader's attention, much like you would with a headline of a newspaper or a magazine. You want to capture the reader's attention and have them continue reading. So what I do is I read the job description and I look for I look for kind of key challenges, problems, or things that they're asking for, and then I bring forth key experiences that are most relevant to either the role, the company, or the industry. So I've said here I manage 60 plus technical product and software engineering requisitions simultaneously for a $12 million startup. Okay, and then I've said recruited 500 clinical and non-clinical staff. These are very much geared towards an individual contributor role. I'm talking about high volume recruitment here in the tech space and in the healthcare space. My background is healthcare and health tech, which I really enjoy. So this is what I would highlight if I was applying to an individual contributor role in those sectors. An example of a tweak that I would make is if I was applying to a leadership position. Let's say I saw a job that was a recruitment manager job. If I read in the job description that this role involves leading a team of recruiters, well, what I'm going to do is look at my background and think about what experiences do I have that are most relevant to that role. And back in 2018, I managed the Canadian talent team, which was a team of 3 senior recruiters and 2 associates. So my leadership experience is further down in my resume. So this is why I like the summary section, because I can use this section to highlight experiences that are more relevant, but perhaps from further back. So what I would do if I was applying to a recruitment manager job is I would delete this bullet point, and instead I would include a bullet point that refers to that experience. And I would say I led a team of 5 recruitment professionals for a global tech company operating in 15 countries. That's what I would do. If the job description is asking me to lead a team of recruiters, and if I have that experience, I'm going to highlight that in my summary section. It's the alignment that I'm aiming for in this summary section. What I'm not doing is I'm not tweaking the experience section, changing all of these things and diluting my experience. When the experience section is done correctly, and I'll show you how to do this, it should be factual. And as soon as we start editing and tweaking and having multiple different versions, my perspective is we move away from the truth, we move away from the facts, and that's what we don't want to do. Now, I'm not directly copying and pasting this bullet point here, managed a Canadian talent team. I'm giving context because the reader doesn't know what type of organization I've done it for at this stage. So that's why I've said led a team of 5 recruitment professionals for a global tech company operating in 15 countries. giving a bit of context here for where I did it. That's an example of a simple tweak that I would make to the resume. Notice I'm not changing the whole resume. I'm not overstuffing it with random keywords that like I'm a results-driven, detail-oriented professional. That's not the type of content that typically lands interviews. What I'm doing here is I'm showcasing key experiences, not throwing in key buzzwords and all this nonsense from the job advert. I'm thinking strategically about what the job description is saying, and then I'm using that to kind of create and form this summary section. So that's my recommendation when it comes to the summary section. Some options for you as well is you might also want to highlight some other things in the summary section if the job description specifically asks for them. So if the job advert is asking for additional language skills and you have them, then you might also want to put them in here. So you might just say bilingual English / Spanish. Okay, just if, again, you don't need to do this, but if the job description is asking for it, then in the summary section, it would be an appropriate place to put information like that. For some roles that involve travel, the job description will say, require the candidate to, travel up to 40%, then includes information like that. So I typically aim for anywhere between 2 to 5 bullet points, okay? Give or take. So that's what I'd recommend in the summary section. As you can see, mine is not taking up half a page. I'm just being succinct with some of my most relevant career experiences. So that's how I would tackle the first section in the resume. For some roles, it might be important to highlight some technical skills, particularly if it's a technical position and the job description is asking for experiences with those particular skill sets. Now, one thing to note here is I often see kind of like Microsoft Office, Google Docs, Excel, and I would say that in this current market, in this current time, those types of technical skills aren't necessarily differentiators. It's ones that might specifically be searched for, like Tableau, SQL, Python. Microsoft Office, Google Docs, those are somewhat of a given that it's assumed that individuals have those types of skills for most markets and most roles. But the exception to that would be if the role specifically asking you for, say, Excel pivot tables or something specific that then you can highlight. But typically I wouldn't list every single technical skill. Think about some of the more niche ones that might be relevant to your industry or sought after. So that's what I would recommend for these skills. The other thing I would recommend is avoiding soft skills. So I've broken down some of the types of skills that you can include. Soft skills are unhelpful in a resume because they're highly subjective. Someone's version of detail-oriented might not be my version of detail-oriented, but if you are managing over 50,000 customer transactions in Tableau and you maintain a 99% accuracy rate, that speaks more about someone's detail-oriented than simply listing the word. They're also not typically searched for in any database or applicant tracking system, so I would recommend removing soft skills. Professional skills they're often listed, but they're not really helpful without a metric. So anyone can just throw in like leadership or pricing or stakeholder engagement. That's a really common one. Anyone can list professional skills, but it doesn't mean that they have them, and it doesn't mean that they're good at them either. And I find listing things just simply not very helpful. An example is like I see strategic planning a lot, okay, and anyone can just throw in the word strategic planning in their resume, but if you said, I created a 2-year strategic plan fundraising initiatives for major events for a countrywide nonprofit with over 60 employees, that tells me more about someone's strategic planning experience and gives that context to the reader. So simply listing these types of skills, not always helpful. The reason technical or industry specific skills can be helpful is because in some cases they are searched for specifically. I'm not ever going to search for stakeholder engagement and see who has stakeholder engagement. But if I was looking for a medical coder, then I might actually search for ICD-9 because that's going to bring me back individuals probably with a relevant background who have included those things in their resume. So hard skills or professional skills, those can be helpful to list, but I also recommend explaining them in a bullet point as well. So that's what I would say about technical skills and the different types of skills that you can include in your resume. Okay, moving on to the professional experience section. I've laid it out here where I've got the company, the location of where you performed the work. You can also put remote / Vancouver or wherever that may be, if that's appropriate. But I would still recommend, highlighting kind of where you were located when you performed the work. Then you've got your title, the job title, and then the dates. I would recommend adding the months, at least for the most recent 5 years. Typically, I'll include it for like 5 to 10 years. Okay. And the reason for that is, even if it was a short tenure, it's better to be upfront than it is to try and hide some of your tenure. Often what I'll see some individuals do as well is just put something like 2022 to 2023. And that could mean December 2022 to January 2023, which is 2 months. Or it could mean January to December, which is almost 2 years. So this clarity is really important, and it's quite likely that someone's going to get asked in an interview anyway. It's just better to own a short tenure than it is to try and hide it or be cagey about it in the resume. So that's my personal approach. In this section here, I like to leave this section to provide a short company summary that gives a little bit of context about what the organization does, whether it's a product or service, who they sell it to, and the size of their market. What I always include here is headcount and revenue. So let me show you an example of why I find this is helpful. In this example here, okay, I could say to you that I worked for a company called Babylon and I was a senior talent acquisition consultant. At this stage, you don't really have any context, okay, about what the organization does. Yes, if you skim the bullet points, you'll be able to tell that it was a healthcare organization. I'm talking about clinical talent. I'm talking about physicians, dietitians. But when I give you, the reader, and I say, Babylon was a global digital healthcare and AI startup that raised 1.2 billion across 8 funding rounds. At its peak, with 2,000 plus employees, its app and services covered 24 million beneficiaries in 15 countries. I position myself as a clear communicator. I'm talking about objective factors that are important to a business. And what I'm also doing here is highlighting things that might potentially broaden my appeal to other organizations. I'm talking about the scope, okay? It was a global organization. The industry was digital healthcare, but it was also an AI organization. That's not apparent from my bullet points. I might be able to talk about this and say that I led recruitment for a global healthcare and AI organization. That might make me more appealing to other AI organizations. This is about broadening your appeal while showcasing your clear communication skills. I'm talking about the stage of business, the kind of scope, like, the fact that they went through funding, the size of the organization in terms of headcount. This might make me more relevant to other organizations of a similar size, but perhaps a different industry. Talking about its app, services delivered at scale across many countries. All of these things are objective factors about my experience, and I can lean on these aspects and talk about leading recruitment for a global organization that was growing, in multiple countries. That might be relevant to another organization that's scaling. So I'm highlighting some of these things to broaden my appeal. So that's what I would recommend here. Now, what I often get asked as well is, if you work for a company like Google or Deloitte, do you need to write a company summary? And you don't have to, okay? But one of the things I'd like to highlight is I've worked on a number of software engineering resumes for Google employees. And for many of those resumes, I could not tell which department or function that they worked for. Google is a search engine. They're also a mapping and navigation application. They're an email provider. They've got an office suite, etc. It can sometimes give you, be helpful to give a bit of context on what specific area or what specific team or specific mandate that large organization that you were working on at that large organization. So if it makes sense for you to give a bit of context to the reader about your team, your scope within a large organization, then I would recommend that. So rather than saying Google's a global tech company, you might be able to give some context that the average person might not know about your role. So that's what I would recommend. And, sometimes it's not about being the biggest and the best. It's about being the clearest candidate. And also just somewhat understanding, right, that someone, a product manager at a 50-person mobile app startup with 10 million in revenue, and 200 business users, it's probably different to someone that is working at a 5,000 person organization with 500 million in revenue and, millions of consumers as opposed to business users. So that context can be really helpful. And honestly, it never hurts to provide clarity in your resume. So that's what I'd recommend for this section here. Now, moving on to the bullet points here. This is, I would say, where most people struggle, and I'm going to show you kind of step by step to hopefully give you enough of a foundation in your resume to either start applying or to bring in some objective content on a resume that you might already have. Okay, so in the first bullet point, my recommendation is that you start with your immediate team size, report to, and just like one kind of overall business goal. So let me give you an example. For Babylon here, I said I reported to the director of clinical talent as one of 5 recruiters supporting Babylon as they expanded 3 to 9 states. This gives context. Immediately someone can understand, okay, my immediate team size. They can also picture kind of my reporting structure, and this context just as they expanded 3 to 9 states, like this is fact. We were growing, we were tripling the number of states, and this is why my role existed. So did I do it all myself? No, but I'm giving the reader some context and most importantly, some metrics in my resume. So I want you to think about, okay, what are some of the business goals? So everyone will likely have a reporting structure. So just say reported to the X as one of, 2 team members, one of 10, HR professionals. If you were the sole person, just say reported to the director of HR as the sole HR manager, and responsible for XYZ. Now, you might also say something like to support expansion from 3 to 9 states like I did, right? Geographic scope. To grow headcount to it by 2x, okay? To support entry into 2 new international markets, something like that. So there should be enough, you should have enough access to information to understand what the business is working towards and then provide that context to the reader. If you are a leader or in a management role or had a management role, mention the number of direct reports you had and like what those functions were, right? So you might be someone that's a technical leader, but you might have different functions reporting into you. So you might say something like manage the team of 10 across product management, software engineering, and project management. Okay, showing the different branches that report into you. If you have a good annual retention metric or some form of retention metric, then I would recommend including that. Next bullet, discuss the scope of the product/service or your role, okay? For example, I said here that I managed up to 12 requisitions, including, clinical operations, registered nurses, pharmacists to support 250,000 value-based care patients in 9 states. I'm talking about the scope of the service that I was recruiting for. Again, easy metric, but gives you, the reader, some context. It is very likely that you will have a customer base or some kind of, if it's not customers, right, it might be patients. It might be a non-profit, right, or program individuals. It might be a program and you have participants, okay? So think about the scope of that service and, whether it was countrywide, international, you can bring that context in. The other section I recommend, or rather in the next bullet, try and mention something about the budget, revenue, or size of market, okay? I've talked about here, I've put 2 bullet points where I've referenced a budget. And I always like to think, okay, because I always think in terms of money made, money saved, or money managed. Many individuals will say, I don't generate revenue, I don't know anything about the budget, my role doesn't support anything. I would argue against that, okay? I once worked with an admin assistant who didn't know how to sell their experience. And then when I asked, it turns out they were supporting 4 executives and those executives were driving X million in annual revenue. Now, we didn't say that this person alone contributed to that revenue amount, but factually they were supporting a team that drove revenue. And ultimately, when it comes to like 2 candidates, and if I see someone that's an admin assistant and says, provide administrative support, like, you don't need to say that. I know an admin is probably going to provide support. Similar with product management. Similar with chief revenue officer. If you say you're a chief revenue officer and you say drove revenue activities for the organization, great, right? That's kind of a given. So the difference is the individual that can quantify and understand that their business has some kind of scope, some kind of revenue. It's about being budget aware. So an example for me is I've said I rejoined Babylon to support their US expansion as they grew revenue 4x year over year. I also saved over $500,000 in agency equivalent fees. Okay. I didn't drive revenue, but I saved some, and I wasn't in a sole revenue generating role, but I mentioned that that's part of the reason why I joined was to support their growth. So these are metrics that you can bring in, and obviously you're not claiming full responsibility, but you are saying that your role fed into the success or the evolution of an organization. So that's what I'd recommend there. Also, think about time frame, okay? I said I utilized Lever ATS and recruited 58 new team members from April to December. Maybe you processed 200,000 consumer transactions in 4 weeks. Maybe you assessed, 4,000 data points in under 2 weeks. Something like that. Time is also something that you can bring in quite easily. Tech software, tools, and platforms. Did you use any? Did you introduce any? Implement any? I here said utilize Lever. I've blended them in. I've said utilize Lever and recruited 58 new team members from X to Y. So I've sometimes blended the kind of different things that I'm trying to bring in, but I definitely recommend for each role bringing in some kind of tech software. Did you hire, recruit, or train any others? Right? What was the team size? Did you grow it from 10 to 15, or was it 200 to 250? Think about these types of metrics. I typically recommend anywhere between 5 to 10 bullet points for each role. So what I also like to do is try and make most of them specific measurable results. You don't always have to have it, right? Just some context can really help. The final thing that I want to kind of leave you with in terms of a lesson when it comes to the experience section is I always think in terms of time, money, team, and scope. Those are the 4 things that I apply, okay? Time, in what time frame did you do something? I've already given some examples, okay? Opened 8 new retail locations in 12 months. That's the time section. Money made, money saved, money managed. The team, okay? You can kind of have a look at this video. And then the scope. And that's when I look at a resume and I see no metrics, those are the questions that I ask in my head. And those, time, money, team, and scope, if you're looking at your document, you're seeing no metrics, try think about some of these questions or bringing in these elements, and it might make it a little bit easier for you to write about your experience. So that's an overview of how I would approach a kind of simple resume format. This is applicable to 6-figure roles, but also just any kind of role that you're going after. It doesn't have to be 6 figures. Try use this as a foundation to build factual, objective content about your experience and also give the reader some context. So like I said, you can get this exact template. Just go to samstruan.com and you can make a copy to your own G Drive and get access to this video as well. So yeah, thank you if you got this far. I really appreciate it. If you found this helpful, I definitely encourage you in terms of next steps to create your own resume. If you do manage to get a result, I would love to hear from you. Drop me a message on LinkedIn if that's something that you're open to, or a social media post. And if anyone out there is needing one-on-one support, feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn or visit samstruan.com for services. So thanks very much and good luck.